Hello, wonderful humans. Welcome back to the TFC Audio Project. On this episode of Health Conversations, I speak with Moses Bernard, and we get into the weeds on how to rebuild our broken healthcare system from the ground up. We cover the fundamental problems in today's system, some first principles and assumptions that we know to be true, and we talk about how the entire education system from kindergarten all the way up to medical school needs to change in order to achieve sustainable health by shifting our cultural values. It was our first time speaking together, and I really enjoyed the conversation with Moses. We hope you find the conversation and the content valuable and useful in order to broaden your perspective and build some optimism on ways we can change the future of health. This episode of the show is brought to you by our newly launched education platform called Beam Tribe. The four letters used to spell the word BEAM, in this case, stand for Bridging Experience and Mindfulness. And although the practice component of the platform is based on the Balance Beam tool and progressions and tasks that you can work on, Beam Tribe also has a theory section, which includes content aimed to improve your understanding of concepts related to health. And it also covers actionable tools that you can start implementing in your life in order to make progress every day on your health journey. If you visit beamtribe.com, we've made a bunch of the content and videos available for free. And if you want full access, you can officially join the tribe and support our content team by purchasing an annual membership. This episode of the show is also brought to you by our family of partner brands listed at thefootcollective.com. These companies have offered discounts or free gifts to our TFC community and also support TFC by helping to fund development and hosting of TFC app. We've developed relationships over time with great brands doing some good work and who align with TFC on the mission to create products that are good for your health and good for the planet. If you check out thefootcollective.com and click on the Partner Brands tab, you'll see a list of brands that offer you discounts, and by purchasing using those links or codes, it helps us keep TFC app free and evolving without ever having to load it with ads or to sell people's data. That's it for sponsors, so let's dig into this episode. Hope you enjoy.
It's the TFC Audio Project.
Hello, wonderful humans. Nick here, back for another episode of Health Conversations, and my guest today is Dr. Moses Bernard. So Moses and I connected over Instagram, and we're speaking for the first time actually in person today, but I think we share a lot of similar views when it comes to health. So, one of his posts a while back made me realize we could probably have an awesome podcast conversation. So Moses, thanks for taking the time on your Saturday morning, and welcome to the show.
I'm excited to be part of the show. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Cool. Yeah, likewise. So, I love the story time post you did not long ago about William Halstead, aka the cocaine surgeon, who seems to have kicked off a shocking system that we still use today. And it was a good illustration that I think a deeper conversation to be had about, the way that things have always been done might no longer be the way that we need to do things today and moving forward. So maybe to start with, let's start with the Coles Notes introduction of who Dr. Moses Bernard is, what you're all about, and what gets you out of bed every morning.
So I am, on paper, I am a chiropractor. I'm practicing in Tampa, Florida, but I am originally Canadian. So I grew up in Saskatoon, went to college there. My undergrad was in exercise phase biomechanics, spent some time at UBC as well. Moved down to the US for chiropractic school to Dallas, Texas. Moved out here to Florida in 2009. And my practice model at first was kind of the more traditional chiropractic things, but running in the background the entire time was my exercise phys, my kinesiology background. And there wasn't really, the two weren't really married. So what I knew about movement and exercise was not really being parroted in the rehabilitation world. So I started looking for ways to have a rehabilitative approach that made a little bit more sense based on everything I knew about movement and biomechanics and so on and so forth. So that led me down a rehabilitation rabbit hole that started with some functional movement systems readings, which led me to some DNS stuff, which led me to some PRI stuff, which eventually led me to some FRC, functional range systems stuff. And that last piece kind of put it all together. And my practice model right now is really just based on teaching people how to use their bodies better.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, that's, this fundamental premise, that I've kind of come to understand over time is just that we need to empower. The role of the health pro is to empower individuals to have a better understanding of what they need to do, right? Like I had the same realization where I came out of physio school and had kind of a, a personal movement background where I loved movement. And actually I didn't even really figure out what movement meant until pretty far after I graduated physio school. But you just realize that if you're treating a patient and they're not on your team as an ally, taking care of themselves to make sure that the stuff you're helping to coach them with is actually being put into practice, then you're kind of working against each other. And I think as time goes on, I realize that only the individual can truly make themselves healthy. We can guide them quite, based on our experience and based on helping them change habits. But if they're not on your team and they don't have a good understanding of what they need to do, it's a very, very frustrating and hard road to make progress. So, yeah.
I definitely agree with you on that. And I feel like really communicating with the patient that, listen, like, by definition, any manual thing I do to you, any treatment you receive to me, at best is going to last for 3 hours. So if you aren't doing stuff on your own, we are just spinning our gears. And there's better people out there to do that. So if your goal is 100% just get out of pain, like, go to the pain management doctor, because drugs are more effective than my hands in terms of getting out of pain. If you want to function so you're never in pain ever again, then let's have a conversation.
Yeah. And I started the first assessment I would do with people. I started doing this kind of like little spiel saying, like, listen, I'm on your team. I want to help you get to wherever you want to go. That, I want to help you accomplish whatever reason you came to see me for. But I can't do the work for you. And this is going to be work. This is not going to be something, if you want something easy and something done on you when you come here and really leave this clinic and not really have to put in any work, well, this is probably not the right place for you. But if you want to dig in and commit to like changing your behavior and getting better permanently, then you're right. Then it's like, okay, let's troubleshoot. Here's where we start. So yeah, we kind of spoke, and you sent me a topic list, and one of the big ones was rebuilding healthcare from scratch. And I think we may as well just dig into the juicy stuff right off the bat. So I think when someone says rebuilding, when someone says rebuilding healthcare from scratch, I think at first glance, it almost seems like a dreamy thought experiment. But, I would personally argue that attempting to change the current system with permutations is simply not going to work. Like, we're just, that old Buckminster Fuller quote, don't try and change the system, create a new one that makes the old one obsolete. Yeah. I really think that we have to really go down first principles and say, okay, let's restart this. Control Alt Delete, because shit has gotten really far off path. So where do you want to start with this?
So that is, I really like that quote. Something that kind of jumped into my head in terms of the rebuilding conversation was something I read from Yuval Noah Harari in 21 Rules for the 21st Century. So this is the guy who wrote Sapiens. And one of the things he talks about is education. And for most of the history of education was scarce. So you might only have one chance in your lifetime to ever come across a book. And so if you come across it, you better memorize everything in there. Right. And then even when the printing press came around, well, it was still only kind of middle class and up who might have access to books. And at the same time, you weren't buying entire encyclopedias every year. So it's really only been since kind of the advent of the internet where information was plentiful, where for all of human history up until that point, information has been scarce. So now it's not an issue of memorizing information, it's an issue of filtering through information. Right. So as far as rebuilding healthcare, it starts with rebuilding education and making education not just about memorizing these facts, it's about, I guess, being able to filter through all the new information coming in and being able to make sense of what matters. So going back to the first principles conversation, well, what are the first principles? What do we know about what is making people sick and hurt right now? Right. So off the top of your head, do you know some of the leading causes of, we'll start with death. So some of the leading causes of death in first world countries.
Well, I know, and back to just to slip something in there with Yuval Noah Harari, one of my favorite quotes from him, which relates directly to what you were saying, is that information is no longer power, clarity is power. And in fact, I would argue that information alone in mass volumes is actually disempowering because it yields confusion, which puts us in a mess. And it even before we started recording, we were talking about how crazy it is that you and me can meet through the matrix and then materialize an actual, a conversation with good substance to it. And it is a crazy time that we live in right now. And I think this old way of teaching people to essentially download information that they're taught by some authority, and think that that's the truth, and pay shitloads of money to learn that. So that kind of makes you really heavily invested in the fact that what you learned is the truth because you paid a lot of money to learn that. And I think we just don't teach people to be good thinkers. We teach them to be good memorizers. And that is just a broken system right out of the gate. So,
so it starts there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think we get, it's like when you go down a couple layers, you're like, oh shit, there's like way more layers than I even thought to this thing. But in terms of the question that you asked and causes of death, I know I'm not a big one on, I don't know all the stats, but I do know that all the shit that's killing us are the things that take a long time to materialize and are mostly trickle down effects of lifestyle.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely.
So I don't know. What about you?
So I asked you that question, not expecting a specific answer because most people know the generic answers.
Yeah.
So typically, heart disease is number one. I'm actually going to pull this up right now.
Well, I know number 3 on there is a shocker when I read it, because I did look these up a while ago and I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah. So depending on which graph you look at and whether they want to use this as a stat or not, medical errors is often like number 3 or number 4.
Yeah.
All right. So this is from the CDC. So we've got heart disease number 1, cancer number 2, lower respiratory disease number 3, which is we'll jump into a little bit as far as the coronavirus things going on. We got stroke is number 4, unintentional injuries number 5, Alzheimer's 6, diabetes 7, pneumonia and influenza 8, kidney disease 9, suicide 10. Okay. Gotcha. So every single one of those is preventable to a certain extent. So so the obvious one, so heart disease, obviously preventable. Most cancers, obviously preventable, because when we look at the cancers that are killing people, it's very rarely kind of the random freak prostate cancer. It's a lot more so like the lung cancer from smoking your entire life, or the colon cancer from eating like shit your entire life. So most of the cancers themselves that are killing you are the ones that have a huge preventative aspect to them. Lower respiratory diseases, well, having any type of cardiovascular health is a pretty big preventative against that. Same with stroke. Unintentional injuries. So this is a really interesting one, and that kind of goes with the suicide thing, is that when life sucks, either there's a tendency to want to end it all, or you engage in riskier behaviors.
Right.
So mental health is something that really is not in our, it's not a foundational part of our healthcare system. It's not a foundational part of our education system. So we'll get into that as far as rebuilding from scratch is concerned. Diabetes, obviously very preventable. Pneumonia and influenza, a lot of things we can do to ramp up our immune system that no one likes to talk about. Kidney disease, obviously preventable nutritionally. So top 10 leading causes of death, 100% preventable. Right. Who are the best equipped people in society to deal with these things? And it's not our healthcare professionals.
Yeah, I agree.
Our frontline healthcare professionals are not the best equipped people to deal with any of these problems.
Right. Yeah, they don't learn.
That is the fundamental problem.
Yeah, and I think you just hit one of the fundamental deep layered problems is like, and even just to backtrack in terms of defining first principles, they're basic assumptions that can't be deduced any further. So if you look at the statistics of what is killing us, that's a pretty good basic assumption that we can look at and be like, okay, well, we have data which shows us what's killing people. So if we're talking about healthcare, if we're talking about true healthcare, where we want to make people healthy, well, I think one of the goals is to mitigate death. And if all the causes of death are preventable based on lifestyle, then clearly we need to focus on lifestyle as a piece of the education to both pros and to the public. And, I think if you boil things down to the most fundamental truths, what are we sure is true? And then build everything on top. Because I think
absolutely
too often we create by analogy, we do permutations on existing systems, but if the system is so far off track, you need to really boil things down to like, okay, what do we know is true? And I think one of my biggest first principles when it comes to health that I like to say when I have a conversation with someone, because if they don't agree with that, then we fundamentally disagree on the root of everything we could potentially talk about, is that the individual must take primary responsibility for their health.
Yes.
Now, I think there's a second layer to that, which says that they need to be, the word responsibility breaking down to response able, they need to be put in a position where they are able to respond, right? So it's not just, oh, you need to take responsibility for your health, go for it. It's like, I think that's
where the tools to be able to take care of your health.
You need even the awareness. Like if you don't even have an awareness of what the hell's causing you the problems, you need awareness and you need tools. And I think that's where pros come in. But at the end of the day, the individual needs to take primary responsibility. And if the system is not engineered around that base premise, I don't think we can have a sustainable system.
Well, we don't have a sustainable system.
Right.
So we're already seeing the impact of that.
Yeah, and I think even another first principle that comes to mind is, this fact that 99.9% of cases, the body functions perfectly and heals itself if we create the right conditions for it. Right? Yes. If we align our behavior with our biology, the body works really well. And I think part of the current system takes this fundamental premise that the body is inherently flawed and we are required to fix it when it breaks, and it's inevitably going to break. And I think that base premise is just flawed. And it makes
for sure.
It makes you feel really good about your expensive degree, but I don't think that aligns with reality.
Yeah, because it doesn't align with reality. So some of the really obvious things, like we have back pain because we're living longer. Like just ideas like that have been debunked so many times that like just by changing infant mortality rates, we change the average age of death. That doesn't mean that some people were just randomly dropping dead at 40 years old from like, I lived a long life. So there's all these fundamental ideas around how we were in the past and how we are now that just aren't true, that are part of the foundation of our current healthcare system that we need to clean up.
Right. Yeah.
So we've got our first principles of death. Okay. Let's look at our first principles of disability. Okay. Number 1, low back pain. Number 2, headaches. 3, diabetes. Number 4, drug use. Number 5, depression. 6, COPD. 7, anxiety. 8, neck pain. 9, other musculoskeletal or musculoskeletal issues, depending on which side of the border you're listening from. And number 10, age-related hearing loss. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of those. Number 1, number 8, number 9. We'll go even number 2 in there. So low back pain, headaches, neck pain, other musculoskeletal injuries. How well equipped is the current healthcare system to deal with those things? Not
very. Right?
Terrible.
And the thing is,
absolutely terrible.
And here's the problem. People misinterpret deal with those things, right? I assume that when you say deal with them, you mean eliminate them, right? Get rid of the pain. And it's hilarious that literally number 1 is a symptom. We love Gray Cook has this great quote where it's like, low back pain isn't a diagnosis. It's a symptom. How the hell do we start confusing those two things?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think, deal with, meaning get rid of them for good. I think most people would say, oh, we're great at dealing with back pain. Yeah, but we're not good at eliminating back pain. So we need to differentiate, like eliminate and deal with the root cause versus manage the symptoms and keep people, like eliminate pain for short transient periods of time. Because that's what people seem to think we're good at, but that's not even the goal.
Yeah. Do you guys have ICD-9 codes up there? Or ICD-9, ICD-10? Does that mean anything to you?
That means nothing to me, but I might not be the best person to ask because the practice that I worked at, I didn't deal with insurance at all. People just paid and then they went and got reimbursed by their insurance on their own doing. So we didn't deal with any codes or anything.
Cool. So I do the same thing, but through my chiropractic education, I was well trained in insurance stuff.
Gotcha.
So there's two systems of codes that we work with in the US. Okay. So number one is the ICD-9, ICD-10 now, diagnosis codes. So they're basically there's this massive, like, multi-thousand page book that has every disease and symptom you could imagine has a specific code. All right.
Wow.
There's a different book called the CPT book, which is the current procedural terminology. So these are the basically the treatments. So you have the diagnosis book and you have the treatment book. Okay. So in the diagnosis book, low back pain is a diagnosis.
Interesting.
So you might have low back pain is a diagnosis. You might have facet compression is a diagnosis. You might have a certain type of disc injury is a diagnosis. And the way the system is currently set up is that X diagnosis equals Y treatment.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
And so a lot of these things that you say they aren't actually diagnoses, well, our current system is set up so they are.
Gotcha. So that's yeah. And that's kind of seems like a really powerful root cause of just how, if we don't question the base assumptions and we attempt to find solutions without questioning the flawed assumptions, obviously we're never going to get anywhere good.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I think you bring up a great point where it's like, if the book that we're basing everything on is part of the problem, that part of the problem needs to be addressed.
Yes, absolutely.
Interesting.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah. So we have a bunch of things that are causing people to die that our current system is totally inequipped to be able to deal with. And we have a bunch of things causing disability that our current system is totally unequipped to deal with.
Right.
So
that's not a good start.
Yeah. So, well, that's not a good start for our healthcare system being efficient, but it is a good start to know how to start to address these things.
Yes, I agree. And I really feel that every single problem, the bigger the problem, the bigger the opportunity. And I think we have a ginormous problem in the world of health, and it has created a ginormous opportunity for, the bar is really low. So it doesn't take much to raise it, but I think you can get orders of magnitude scale increase in health efficiency by just rethinking some of these base assumptions. And I think those 2 points you brought up are great places to start, because it's like, okay, what are the problems and how equipped are we to deal with them? And if there's a massive incongruency there, then all right, that's problem number one that we need to solve. And I think you'd probably agree that professional education is essentially the root cause of this problem. How pros are trained. If how pros are trained is completely out of alignment with what pros are seeing and what problems pros need to solve, then that's the start, basically.
Well, not even. So part of my solution is that the pro that we're using for certain scenarios is the wrong professional.
Ah, good point.
So right now, our system is set. So here's an example, okay? So I was sharing this with a patient the other day, and the patient's like, that's exactly what happened to me with my knee. So here's the situation. Patient wakes up, knee hurts a lot. They go to their primary care physician, okay? Primary care physician says, take these drugs, let the inflammation go down. If it doesn't after a while, come back and see me. So she does that for a couple of weeks, goes back to the GP. GP is like, okay, I don't really know what's going on. Let me get imaging. So they get x-rays, they get MRIs, things are fine, okay? They're like, okay, don't know what to do here, sent to PT, all right? PT does the kind of traditional muscle stim, ultrasound, no actual movement, just passive care, PT, okay? PT doesn't work.
Should be MT, modality therapy.
Yes. So now PT doesn't work. So they go back to the GP. GP says, okay, we need a specialist. Now the person goes to the orthopedic surgeon. Orthopedic surgeon says, your MRIs are clear. There's nothing for me to do. I would say maybe just work out, but take it easy. So now they go to the personal trainer. Personal trainer's like, why didn't you tell me this 3 months ago? Like, I've got exercises for this. Like, I can help you with this. So a few weeks of working with the personal trainer with a slightly different approach fixes the entire problem.
Yeah.
So in this situation, the best equipped person to help them with getting their knee to move better was the personal trainer, who, if we look at it in the grand scheme of things, has the lower hourly rate of every single person that they saw on this list.
Right.
And this was what happened last.
Yeah.
So we have GP at a pretty high hourly rate. We have X-ray imaging tech at a pretty high rate. We have the radiologist that read the films at an extremely high rate. We have the orthopedic surgeon at a pretty high rate. We have the PT who's at a is probably at a higher rate than the personal trainer.
And the MRI, don't forget that. That's a big.
Sorry?
And the MRI too. That's a big one.
Yeah, for sure. So we have all these things that are ridiculously expensive that were done first, as opposed to, okay, what is the cheapest option? Who is the best equipped to deal with it?
Right. So the triaging system was broken.
Yeah, it's backwards. It's totally backwards.
Yeah.
So
and why do you think that is? Like, where's the disconnect from the GP? Because I think we'd probably, do you feel that the GP should still be the primary kickoff point to then determine the appropriate path?
Absolutely not. So the way I think the system should be set up is the first line of defense should be the cheapest, least educated person who's trained in that problem.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example. When it comes to movement, okay? So you have low back pain. First line of defense for that should be the kinesiology graduate personal trainer.
Yep, I agree.
Because that person has a good amount of education on how to move the body.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that person, compared to the physical therapist, compared to the MD, compared to the specialist MD, is going to be a whole lot cheaper and probably a whole lot more effective. Train that person really well to know what are the things that are outside of their scope of practice. Really train that person extremely well in the kind of the yellow flags and the red flags.
Yep.
If there are red flags, or if there's yellow flags, they work through them for a little bit. If they hit a wall, they refer up to the next level.
Along with all the data gained by working with that kinesiologist. Because even if they can't solve the problem, they can probably make significant improvements through using movement as a modality, and more importantly, through using education as a modality to make sure that that person knows, okay, well, here are the things that we know contribute to back pain. Here are things, assuming that we've ruled out red flags and are mindful of yellow flags, here are things that we can do that carry a low risk, yet a high potential for reward, which, like you said, coming from the kinesiologist or movement pro, are very low in cost, or very low in burden to the medical system, and yet are the highest effectiveness in terms of being able to solve the problem when you look at things. So
absolutely,
that's a great point.
So that's level one. Level two might be the level of trained manual therapist. So maybe we now get into like the massage therapist. So maybe just a little bit of generic hands-on work gets them to the next level.
Right.
Next level from that, the highly specialized movement specialist. So that's where your chiropractor, your physical therapist comes in.
I'd be really interested to see, the percentage of low back pain. And, as an aside to this, if we had a way for movement pros to be able to be essentially graded based on their effectiveness in some way, shape, or form by the patient. So patient X goes to see movement pro Y, then says, wow, I got rid of my back pain, or I got a better understanding to the point where I had really low symptoms and felt that I had control over this problem in 4 visits.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a way for Movement Pro Y to be able to have almost like a rating system, quote unquote, to show who is the best equipped to deal with these things, who has had the best result, has a history of the best results. Like, I think there's no barometer that rewards effectiveness. And I think that's this key part of the problem, where if we
I'm gonna agree and disagree with you on that. So there is no barometer in the health insurance system to deal with that. There is a barometer in the free market to deal with that.
Yes. Word of mouth?
Yeah. And cash. And so a Charlie Weingroff in New York City can charge $400 or $500 an assessment because he's built up a reputation that you spend an hour or 2 with him, he will find the answer quickly. Right. You go to Craig Liebenson in LA, it's going to be the same type of thing. So the free market has dictated a certain level of skill and expertise gets rewarded. Mm-hmm. But the way our current insurance system is in play implies that every professional service is an equal commodity.
Right.
So basically, no matter what country you're in, if there is kind of a insurance model at play, what we are saying is the physical therapist who got out of school yesterday and the physical therapist who's got 30 years of experience deliver the exact same product because we're reimbursing them at the same level.
Right. So it's really, when you put insurance in there, it takes away the market forces that automatically incentivize effectiveness and reimbursement for outcome.
Correct.
Yeah.
So imagine I go to the car dealership and I say, I've got $40,000 to spend. And they just basically they have a bucket and they put every single car on the planet in that bucket and they shake them all up. And whatever I draw out of the bucket is what I get. I might get a brand new Tesla. I might get a beat up 1995 Honda Civic. Right. We don't know, but I'm paying the exact same amount. And that is the state of our healthcare system.
Right. And even sometimes the dealership is incentivized to give you the shittiest car for $40,000.
Yes,
or give you the least amount of service and effort required in order to extract those resources, which is this, this weird thing that we've just allowed in the system. And, people will say, oh, it's such a big system, like it's hard to change. It's like, yeah, but it's worth working and putting in the effort to change it, because it's there's a shitload of suffering happening because of something we're not willing to kind of have honest conversations about and innovate solutions beyond just changing little things here and there.
Mm-hmm. So recently I've been nerding out on the Versailles TV show on Netflix, and it makes me think of things like the French Revolution. So if you want to talk about a system that was in place for a really long time, that had a lot of momentum and would have been really hard to reverse, it was the fucking monarchy, okay? So if somehow humans found a way to look at that system and be like, this isn't working for us, we need something different. If we can do with something with that's been as deep ingrained as that, we can do it with healthcare.
Yeah, I agree. Because everyone's on our side, right? Like the pros want to be more effective. The people, the public wants to not be in pain. I think the people who are currently benefiting the most from the current system are the people that are creating the friction, which seems to hold a higher degree of, power than all of the other people. And I think part of it is just the other people don't know that something can be done.
Yep.
Right. It's like when you're in when you're on the Ferris wheel, it's hard to get clarity of how you can fix the Ferris wheel.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's, I think this podcast medium creates a place for conversations, for important conversations to happen and for more ears to hear these conversations.
Absolutely.
And even if it's not saying solutions that can be put in place and are perfect, but at least talking about the potential for solutions that are possible, because I think the magnifying glass has been put on health as a whole with this. Today is May 2nd. We're still in the midst of this corona pandemic. And I think people are realizing that, like, wow, the virus itself is a thing, but my health is the biggest determinant of whether or not that thing is a massive threat to me or is not a threat to me.
Yes. So I've definitely observed that how my healthy colleagues are dealing with coronavirus and are stressed about coronavirus is very different from unhealthy people that I might come across in just day-to-day life.
Right.
And the healthier people realize that there is a step between being exposed to a pathogen and me getting the disease and overrun by the pathogen. And that step in between is called your health.
Yeah.
And your health is the filter that allows that pathogen to thrive or not thrive.
Yeah. And the issue is people wait until the pathogen comes to focus on something they should have been focusing on all along. And that takes time in order to build. Like you can do a lot to work on your health when something happens, but to be truly resilient takes a lot of time, takes a lot of practice. And we shouldn't, the analogy of, you don't build an aircraft carrier when the war starts. You build it way in advance, so it's there and ready when the shit hits the fan, because you don't know when that's going to be.
Yep.
And I think we've just taken this, we're wired for short-term thinking. We just think tomorrow. We don't think a week from now or a month from now or like a lifetime. It's just beyond the scale of what I think our typical wired time frame in terms of what we focus on is for humans. And it's just this weird thing that we don't talk about. It's like your health is important every day, not just in times of emergency. And hopefully this situation has kind of created, because I feel like we're, it's not, things are never black and white, right? There's always a lot of gray. And I think this quote unquote health revolution has kind of started and been happening for a while. If you're looking for it, you see it, or if you're in the weeds, you see it. But, my hope is that this whole thing, because it can either go in two directions. Either we can be distracted by this thing, by all the voices that are trying to find a platform to speak, whether that's good, healthy information or not healthy information, or we can use it as being like, oh shit, yeah, let's do this. Let's like speed up and catalyze this health revolution that's been simmering but hasn't really gotten the final push. So I hope it's the second one.
Yeah, definitely. So let's go back to our rebuilding from scratch.
Yep.
So in our back pain example, we talked about, let's start with the most skilled, least cost person, train them in the yellow and the red flags at their level. Mm-hmm. And if it's something that's outside of their scope, they go up to the next level. So we have the well-trained personal trainer level 1. We have generic manual therapist number 2. We have the chiropractor, physical therapist, highly skilled movement expert level 3. Maybe after that, GP is level 4.
Interesting.
So at that point, it's like, okay, we've now dealt with your movement really, really well and really, really deeply. And we know that we've trained everyone at the bottom levels to know with certain red flags, they should have been sent directly to level 4, level 5, whatever. So we train people as like, okay, yeah, you've got back pain and you've lost some bowel and bladder function. Boom, straight to GP. Right. Like we can train people to identify that. That's not that hard. No. So we've done all of these lower cost things. We're now at the level of GP. GP might find there's certain things in their blood work that's keeping their inflammation higher than it should be, or what have you. Okay. So then it might be they take the medical route to put out some fires. Then it might be, let's go to the next level, which might be advanced imaging. Mm-hmm. Then it would be, let's go to like the specialist.
Right. A much more, that hierarchical system makes way more sense from a cost burden standpoint, but also more importantly, from an effectiveness standpoint.
Absolutely. So it's going to be way more effective. It's going to be way cheaper. It's going to be way faster. There's the quote unquote downside is that the higher level people aren't seeing as many people. Right. So it ends up being that we would need to rebuild the system so that the specialists are running way lower volume.
Yeah. And also the scarcity of those services is all of a sudden lower. So maybe the
Yes.
price, because we don't need the same volume of higher level specialists, maybe the price of education and the demand for getting into those schools isn't as high, right?
Yeah,
Because
it
market
changes.
forces would say that should be the case.
Yep, absolutely.
And I would even, as a sub layer to even entering that pipeline of needing to see professionals, I think a key part of a truly sustainable healthcare system is figuring out how do we get some base heuristics, like validated science-based heuristics to the public and make it available to them with low friction and without it requiring a high level of cost, right? Like if we make a powerful free tool available to the public as public education, I mean, really, this should be taught in school. Like what better thing to learn about in high school than your health? What is more applicable for the rest of your life than health? Like I don't need to use algebra anymore, but I should probably know how to be a healthy, functioning human so that I don't burden the system. And I think we need to create some sort, like what happened to the public service announcements? Like I don't see shit in terms of awareness by governments as public services announcements, which used to be a thing, but they've kind of seemingly disappeared, despite the fact that everyone has a media outlet in their pocket at all times. It would be great if government of Canada, in my situation, had sponsored Instagram ads that said, hey, back pain is preventable. Here are the common causes. Here are things you can do. Like that would be a powerful tool to just even eliminate a high volume of people having to go into that pipeline.
Absolutely.
And that's not that hard to do.
Nope, would not be hard to do at all.
So it just seems, sometimes you take a step back, you're like, is anyone else seeing this? Like what did we miss here? What is going on?
So again, it's one of those things where it's just been this way for so long that people just assume that it's inevitable that it has to be this way into the future.
Yeah.
And that's just not true.
Right.
So you mentioned education. So right now, I've only talked about rebuilding the healthcare system itself, but it really starts way, way, way younger. And so if we go back to kindergarten and we look at just education from the ground up, what are the things that we are teaching? What are the things we prioritize? How much time are we spending on those things?
Yeah. Because it really has to be like a multi-front assault on, okay, we have because I think it's like, okay, let's look at system elements. So if we're talking about a healthcare system, what are the individual elements? Element number one is you have the public, you have humans.
Yeah, you've got the patient.
You have the patient, you have, and along with that, patient education. And then you have the pros and pro education.
Yep.
So those are kind of like the fundamental puzzle pieces that then get put into this machine that figures out how to align those pieces in the most efficient way. But you're right. I think when it comes to public and the public education, it starts like, like you just expanded my frame of what education means. Cause I was like, okay, a high school or education as adults, but like, you're right. It starts with instilling the right value. Like health culture change starts when kids are young.
Yes.
And right now we just have this, media perpetuated, consumerism perpetuated set of junk values that we just seemingly don't care to change, and yet could immediately change with the next generation growing up, right? Where fundamentally you don't have to tell kids not to be on their phones all day. They know that being on their phones all day is not good for them, right? They don't smash their fingers with hammers because they know that that's not good for them. So how do we change the value structure taught from a very young age to help kids be more independent and self-responsible with understanding the true risks? Because, climbing monkey bars or climbing a tree is seen as a bigger risk than being glued to a cell phone all day long. And the reality and the truth just doesn't align with that. So how do we, we need to change that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it goes back to the first principles of what's likely to cause disability, what's likely to cause death, and make sure that we build our system around that. So let's jump back to the origins of education. Right now, the goal is not to train people to be cogs in the wheel of the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, and yet that's still the system in place.
Yeah, so from ringing bells at a certain time, like that's the whole system. That's the whole foundation of the system. So right now, if we look at how much math do we need, how much science do we need, how much health education do we need, how much phys ed do we need, if we again just rebuild it from the idea of what is our society going to need, let's start with that.
Right.
So at our fundamental level, there is a fundamental level of just shapes, colors, letters, all that stuff. Like that stays the same.
Right.
When it starts to get into how deep do we need to go down the math rabbit hole, I think by time you get to pretty basic algebra, like it should end there.
Well, yeah, like we have supercomputers in our pockets now. Like you don't need to to know how to do advanced addition or subtraction or division when like you're probably not like simple math. Yes, very valuable. You're stranded in the woods. You should be able to read a compass, do basic math, triangulation, whatever.
Yeah.
But you're right. I think we've put too much of an emphasis on this, some of the stems, right?
Mm-hmm.
On math, especially when. And don't get me wrong, if you want to be a computer scientist,
Mm-hmm.
then the option to dig deeper into math should be available to you.
Yeah, for sure.
But to force kids to learn things that give them virtually no value beyond the period of schooling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something to be said with putting things in front of kids and having them learn things with the mindset that really what they should be learning is how to learn, not how to memorize.
And this goes back to Harari's work in that when we transition from information scarcity to information abundance, your ability to learn becomes really important. And
Right.
when we have a society that is so dramatically changing in that every 10 to 15 years, everything is totally different, your ability to reinvent yourself professionally becomes absolutely paramount. So let's say you're a marketer, okay? You graduated with a marketing degree in 2005, okay? What were you taught in school about what mediums to use for marketing?
Right. Print media.
Yeah, okay. The main sources of media right now did not exist when that person graduated from school.
I agree.
So Instagram, Facebook, like all of these ad avenues just didn't exist. Where people consume their information didn't exist.
Exactly. So it's, the asset is not learning a fixed set of information about how to navigate the current media type. It's how to be resourceful enough to know where to go to get the information to learn about the new media sources. Because you're right. Like we live in a world now that completely turns itself over on a much more frequent cycle length than ever before. And I don't see that slowing down. So it's people need to be taught how to be resourceful and how to essentially filter. They have to be taught how to develop a really strong filter.
Yep.
And I would argue that one of the most important things today that's not being taught is how to fight distraction. Because so many, like we live in a world of distraction where attention is a commodity and it's very highly valued, and there's billions of dollars and some of the smartest behavioral designers in the world working on stealing our attention.
Yep.
And I think, one of the things we should learn in school is how to protect ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And now we need to protect ourselves from people trying to steal our attention. And you can't actually be resourceful or learn effectively if you can't even focus on something for more than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And this is something very new, right? Like school curriculums are just freight trains. I would argue that any large institutionalized curriculum is a freight train that has so much momentum that apart from mild changes in certain elements of it, it's not prepared to deal with these massive cultural frame shifts that are happening way more frequently than they ever used to. So we need to create a much more dynamic system both in the way, this whole thing about textbooks is like, those should be in museums now. And
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
you're seeing that more and more where kids are learning on iPads, but,
Yeah.
I still learn from textbooks in physio school.
Yeah.
And they were outdated when I learned from them, let alone probably 2 years after they were written. So why the heck is that still the standard?
Yeah, exactly. Like by time it gets to textbook, it's already like even before we had the speed of increasing information, textbooks were outdated by time they came into print.
Right.
Now it's even worse, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. It is literally crazy. Because if it takes you 2 years to write a textbook in an industry like health, which is accelerating in its turnover of, new developments, new research, new information, textbooks should be outdated, really.
Yeah, textbooks gone. Get rid of them.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so back to education. All right, so we talked about the math thing. There are certain fundamentals of math that you require to be a functioning human.
Yes.
So you're getting a mortgage, you need to understand the principles of interest rates. Like there's some basic math things you need to know.
Which isn't even being taught. Like personal finance to achieve financial health is a seriously overlooked topic. Like that's a beautiful, actual, useful application of math. Like if we taught math in the context of these are basic things that you're going to need to navigate as an adult in real life. Like you're going to have to make money. You're going to have to know the fundamentals of being able to be a financially healthy person that is comfortable and independent with, not going broke and not stressing over money. So here's a tangible application in math that is useful, that also teaches you the fundamentals of math, because that was not something I was ever exposed to. And, just teaching the basics of this is how credit cards work. Like no one is taught that. So it's not really that much of a surprise that people screw it up.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we've got our math piece, okay? Let's go to the next one, my favorite one, the history piece.
Yes.
How much memorizing of historical facts should be part of our curriculum right now? Fucking nothing.
Yeah.
Because every single historical fact is we all have a supercomputer that makes that answer less than a second away.
Right. Okay, yeah. So I was misinterpreting. History is not important for it. Memorization of history is not important. I agree that
understanding of history is incredibly important.
I agree. Yeah.
So make history class not about memorizing the facts, but understanding what happened.
Right. Because making kids memorize shit is inherently silly.
Yeah.
Because kids don't even it depends how deep you want to go into this, because the fact that we make kids adopt a sedentary position all day and expect their brains to work at an optimal level in and of itself is so silly and outdated. But to try and get kids to jam information and retain it, that is, likely uninteresting for the bulk of them based on the way it's taught and the content that's being delivered. To think that would work ever is so silly, let alone something that's done as essentially the gold standard in education still. It's so whack.
Yeah. So the thing is, back in the day, if the goal was just to teach you how to memorize things for a life where you were going to be sitting down and doing the same repetitive movement over and over again, it makes sense.
Right. And if you didn't have a phone in your pocket that had access to unlimited information, it made sense to try and get stuff into your brain that you might not come across again or would be hard to come across again. So you're right. It served a purpose at some point, but I don't know where that threshold was when it lost its value, but it wasn't yesterday.
Yeah, for sure. So we have, I'm pulling up what the common, all right. So the fundamental things in elementary school. So we've got math, science, social studies, language arts, music, art, reading.
Right.
Okay. Notice what was missing.
Health.
Yes.
the most important life skill for the rest of your life. And I think it can be I think the topic of health can be trickled into a lot of those other elements, but the fact that it's not even on the radar is a really big problem. And I think that's because I think if we focused on getting kids to be good thinkers, and we percolated the topic of health in various, with regard to various pillars and in various ways into the curriculum, we would result in, young adults that are better prepared to filter through bullshit if they were taught beyond, if you want to be a health professional and you have a basic understanding of health, well, you can hit the ground running in a big way when you start to do professional level education.
So let's talk about something really, really simple. Something that you could teach at a very, very, very young level. Okay?
Right.
Cars.
Yep.
Controlled articular rotations. That when you don't move a joint through its full range of motion, it gets shitty. You can teach that to a small child and they get it.
Right.
Like that wouldn't be hard. So if that was being drilled into people every year of their life from kindergarten to 12th grade, they're foundationally are in such better shape than our average 12th grade graduate right now.
Right. Like the amount of high school kids that I treated in clinic made my heart hurt because I was like, why the hell is this kid, all these non-contact injuries that are happening? And even, I agree, cars as a tool are insanely powerful. It's a life skill. Like it is not, this isn't just like a transient piece of information that helps you like while you're in high school. This is a life skill. But even before that, I remember teaching like an 8-year-old the concept of the SAID principle. And he understood it. And I don't think this kid was like the next savant, but he was like, oh, so if I don't use this muscle, the muscle gets weak. Okay, I understand that. And if we taught that and we had that baseline, software installed at a young age, that increases your confidence and your ability to troubleshoot basic issues to a massive, massive extent, right? Where you're like, oh, my hip feels stiff or this hurts. Maybe it's because I haven't been using it. Maybe it's because I need to use it more. Oh, and I know these cars that we learned and we made a game out of it when I was in
first grade.
In first grade, we played the car game. That's huge.
So with that, the general principles of opening versus closing angle pain. That'd be very easy to teach.
Right. And
the principles of muscle pain versus nerve pain. Very easy to teach.
Yeah, we don't think kids are, we give way less credit to how intelligent kids are if you give them information in the right way.
Yeah.
They're really smart.
So if a foundational part of our education system becomes teaching very, very foundational principles of movement, we've now functionally eliminated some of the leading causes of death and disability.
Yeah, you eliminate back pain.
Yeah. So not just back pain. So let's go back to the list. Where are we at? Back pain, number 1. Neck pain, number 8. Other musculoskeletal, number 9.
Yeah.
If by knowing how to move their body, they move their bodies more and they maintain their body fat levels better, well, that now has trickle down effects into like heart disease and diabetes and respiratory disease and things like that.
Well, just a basic understanding of food. Like we started teaching.
Oh, food. Don't get me started on that. Like, yeah. So we're only talking about movement so far. We haven't yet okay. So let's go back to. I'm going to jump around on you a little bit.
That's okay. So, and just to sneak something in there.
Yeah.
I have this theory where if we, people are like, okay, yeah, we can teach kids, but we have the biggest problem right now is not with kids, it's in adults. I'm like, yeah, but where do the kids go at the end of the day? They go home. They can literally, you could teach a generation of kids to educate and essentially help their parents fix themselves by just gaining this basic understanding. It's like the parent doesn't have to do the kid's homework, math homework with them. The kid can literally do their movement homework with their parents and make their parents better. Like it's a really powerful solution if you actually implement it with full effort.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so where are we going to go?
Yeah, so I wanted to jump back into my adult with low back pain, and kind of the first provider being the kinesiology grad personal trainer. Okay.
Yep.
So let's go back to those leading cause of death, leading cause of disability. We have the movement specialist is pretty well geared to help with a lot of these things. Okay. Let's look at, I'm going to go the mental health route. Okay. So on the disability list, number 4, drug use. Number 5, depression. Number 7, anxiety. If we go to the death side of things, we have number 5, unintentional injuries. Number 10, suicide. So mental health, obviously, is a really big deal, causing a lot of death, causing a lot of disability.
Yeah, it's 25% of those. You know, if those two lists make up 20, the big 20, 25% of the big 20 that you just named off, 5 of them are mental health.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
The weird thing about mental health is that we don't touch it until it's a catastrophe.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, that's not that different from physical health, let's be real, but it's this crazy thing that we've just not seen the obvious things right in front of our faces. Yeah. So how do we integrate mental health into, what are the kiddie versions of mental health education for kids?
So I have a really good friend who's a mental health professional. She is a trained psychotherapist, and she works with kids. And she has this amazing analogy. So she has a couple amazing analogies that she uses with kids. One of them she shared with me, and I now use this analogy with my adult patients. Nice. So it's that when you feel a certain way about something. So let's say you get angry, or let's say or just whatever emotion happens. Once the emotion is there, it can take a while to settle in. So so she has basically this container, this like mason jar with like water and confetti and like glitter and like all sorts of random stuff in the mason jar. Okay. And she shakes up the mason jar and she's like, you see all the chaos in here? That's you being angry. And once I've shaken it up, it takes time for it to all settle down.
Yep.
And that anger only goes away once it's all settled down. And if you continue to think about the thing that's making you angry, that's like you just shaking it up again. So now you're starting over. So you need to learn that once the jar is shaken up, it's like, oh, I'm angry now. It's going to be there for a while. I just need to sit in this.
Yep.
So she teaches like kindergarten kids this, and they get it. Okay. So that's one thing. The other thing is she will teach that there is a difference between events that happen in the world and how we perceive those events and the story we make and what we make it mean.
Right. And the concept of neutrality, of everything being neutral until you make a judgment on it.
Yes.
And that judgment is actually within your control.
Exactly. She teaches that to children.
This is making me really optimistic, by the way. I'm really like, this is making my heart warm hearing all these things, because these are legit, simple, free solutions that can solve a shitload of suffering.
Yep. I work in a yoga studio, so I've got a lot of teachers who work at the studio who are really passionate about kids. So they will go in and they will teach yoga classes to kids in elementary schools, and they will teach the principles of meditation. And they will teach kids to realize that they are not their thoughts.
That's
so
beautiful.
You've got small kids learning that, oh, my brain just makes random decisions. It just random things pop in there, and they don't mean anything. They don't have to mean anything.
Right. And I don't have to act on them or think that they're just things.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Like you can look at thoughts and emotions objectively. Like these are the installation of very powerful health values, foundational health values of personal understanding and just And I think it goes way deeper than just themselves, because when they see another kid that's super angry, they don't think, oh, I hate that kid, that's a bad kid. They're just like, oh, their mason jar is really messed up right now.
Exactly.
I wonder if they know what they need to do to calm the mason jar down.
Exactly.
Instead of being like, oh, you're a dick, and then just, yeah, it's powerful. I wish adults knew that shit.
Sorry, what was that?
I said I wish adults knew that shit, because you'd have way less. Like the other day, I don't know if it's because I'm looking for them, but sometimes I witness the dumbest confrontations, and I just want to go up to people and give them a hug and be like, whatever's happening to you, I'm sorry that you're struggling, but like, we need to be nicer to each other, because it's just, there's these shit storms that develop out of nowhere. And if people just knew the mason jar analogy, if people just knew that everyone is suffering in their own respect, and if you're nice, it solves a lot of the problems, we would just be in a better world.
Couldn't agree more, my friend. Couldn't agree more. So we talked about movement at kind of a foundational grade school level and at a professional level. Okay. Let's talk about mental health. We talked about it at a foundational level. Let's talk about it as a professional level. Okay. The current mental health system is wait for catastrophes.
Right.
And then send them to the highest level expert.
And oftentimes the Band-Aid is applied by that expert.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's look at a mental health hierarchy similar to what we saw with physical movement. Okay. So have a portal of entry mental health professional. So think of this like the life coach, if you will, but it's more the mind
coach.
Huh? Yeah.
The mind coach.
Yeah, for sure. So in your primary care model, there is a movement person in the primary care model. There is a mind coach in the primary care model, and there is a nutrition coach in the primary care model. So on the mind coach thing, we have someone who is trained, let's say they've got a undergrad psych degree, and they're just trained to teach people a little bit deeper things about their mind.
Yeah, and basic mental health tools that are actionable and don't require a massively deep understanding. And it's, and I think fundamentally in all these first line courses, like this kinesiologist that comes out of university with an undergrad and the equivalent with the mind and food, I really think that a fundamental understanding of behavior design and how habits are built and broken isn't that hard of a thing to teach. Like, put tiny habits and put some of BJ Fogg's work as a fundamental element of all these programs, and you all of a sudden have super weapons of helping people understand behavior so that people don't blame themselves for not doing something they should be doing or doing something they shouldn't be doing. They blame the design of how they're engineering their life, which is guiding them to the wrong behaviors. So that was something I learned about it now. And if we had these first line people understand behavior design just a little bit, not like experts, but just a little bit, I think it significantly magnifies their effectiveness at that base level, at that entry point into the pipeline of looking for help.
Well, I think waiting for them to do it is too late. I think we can do that at the grade school level.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, that's so true.
So going back to how do we rebuild our educational curriculum? So in part of the health triad, okay, through grade school and high school, make the movement piece a big chunk. So hour a day, the movement piece is part of your education. That doesn't change.
And trickle movement into everything else so that we have a more movement-rich environment.
Yeah, sure.
In all the other stuff. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Make nutrition a foundational piece through the multiple levels.
Yep.
Make mental health a foundation. We'll say mental health a foundational piece through all the levels, and we'll call it like thinking. We'll call it.
Yeah.
So like the fundamentals of habits, the fundamentals of logic, the understanding human biases, the basics of system 1, system 2, learning about game theory, learning about first principles, if I didn't touch on that already. So these are things that are foundational to how we process information that you can teach at a young age.
Yep. I agree.
So we teach people those things systematically through grade school. Now the foundation that they have by time they get to needing that professional are totally different.
Yeah. I agree. And the narratives that you use to teach these things, or the stories that you tell kids at different ages, might be different.
Oh, for sure.
But the underlying values, these like deeper meanings, whether kids realize that's a deeper meaning or not, are like basically trickle into all of those levels.
Yep.
And it's I think consistency of the message. Like, think of how advanced a kid would be if they were exposed to that. And I'm sure there's, I'm sure like Montessori, or I don't know for a fact, but I'm sure there are schools. Like, we're not the first people to talk about this, but
yeah, for sure.
I really think, like, I'm literally going to get someone on our team, as a side note, to fire this podcast to the health minister of Ontario as many times as possible to see if they can get their ears on this. Because I don't know if they're even hearing this information.
Yeah. So yeah, part of it is, sometimes they don't know. So when I read, I'm assuming you've read Spark, right?
Yeah, great book. John Ratty.
Yeah. So when I read Spark, I was like, holy shit, how did I not know this?
Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
I'm a fucking doctor. Like, I started my kinesiology at UBC. I finished at U of S. Okay. So these are strong programs. And then I went to chiropractic school. Okay. So I've spent, like, at this point, I had like well over a decade of advanced knowledge of movement. How the hell did I not know that by simply adding a little bit of daily aerobic exercise, your math and science scores would go through the roof? Like, the information is there. How did I not know that? That is a fundamental problem in the system. Yep. When I read just last year, Why We Sleep, Matthew Walker's book, that your immune response to a flu shot or a vaccination is
totally different.
If you lose just an hour or two of sleep. How the hell did I not know that?
Right.
Like, could we teach this to kids? Absolutely. Would not be hard.
I agree. And one of the footers in Australia brought up a great point. He's like, the other day I realized that, so he has a young kid, and he's like, I realized that I do all these things for my kid, and I just forget to do them for myself. Like so he realized it with the pre-sleep routine. He's like, I know how important it is for me to have a stable and consistent pre-sleep routine with my kid. I think he has to go to bed at the same time. We do something before bed to get him, like almost like a ritual, like reading a book or telling a story that gets him into the mindset of sleep. He's like, and then I go and do a bunch of bullshit that I know I shouldn't be doing, but I don't just think like, I just need to do what I do for my kid because it's the same requirement. And yeah, it's just this realization that these principles that apply to all ages are equally effective for all age categories. We just forget to use them. We think, oh, it's good for my kid, but I don't need that. It's like, actually, you might.
Yeah.
But I agree. Sleep is like, when I read Matthew Walker's book, it exploded my brain. I instantly called my parents. I'm like, how many hours a night do you sleep? Because I don't want to be taking care of my mother with dementia earlier. Like, I don't want that to happen. So how many hours do you sleep? Let's talk about your sleep, because we've never talked about it before, and I never actually knew it was important until now, despite being a health professional. And you're right. Like, the really good gems from there can be instilled as core values, that sleep matters. And this whole, like, if we reverse the machismo with sleep, where it's like, you're not a hero if you sleep at all. If you don't prioritize sleep, you're a hero if you actually sleep.
Yeah. So there is a certain degree of shaming that currently happens with obesity.
Yep.
Whether that's a good thing or not. So if we look at obesity in terms of the health impact, there's a certain level of obesity that has definite negative health consequences. And we have a society that kind of shames that a little bit. And in my opinion, that isn't all bad. Shaming any level of appearance that isn't a Hollywood ideal is very bad. But shaming unhealthy behaviors, I'm okay with that. We kind of shame certain levels of alcoholism. We shame certain levels of drug use.
Yeah.
We should kind of shame certain levels of sleep deprivation.
I agree. And what's your definition of shaming?
So we have a society that looks at it and says that is bad.
Yes, I agree. I think, yeah, because I think some people might misinterpret unnecessary or meanness. I mean, even the word mean is kind of a loaded word, but like we shouldn't promote unhealthy behaviors.
Correct.
So by that virtue, we should disincentivize or look poorly on behaviors that we know are unhealthy.
Correct. And with some of them, we currently do, but with a lot of them, we do not.
I agree. And there's a difference between needlessly, berating someone.
Yeah.
For being
I'm not talking about that.
Yeah. And just being like, but the flip side of this, like the pendulum has shifted so hard that people are like, I am overweight and I'm proud. It's like, well, that doesn't mean it's okay.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you should try and stay that way or find an echo chamber that everyone could say, oh, we're proud to be overweight. It's like, no, that's not okay. You shouldn't be needlessly shamed for it, but you should also understand that that's really unhealthy. Like you're going to have fewer quality years and you're going to have less years on your life. Yep. And you need to be aware of that, but you also need to be helped to understand some basic tools and awareness around how you can fix that problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely.
And it's almost like we have to teach kids that when someone is overweight, it's an opportunity to help them better understand maybe what is going on with creating that sense of being overweight. With, like if we turn kids into allies with each other, it's like, oh, it looks like, if the kid looks at the overweight kid and says, hey, what kind of stuff are you eating? Like, can we, like, I just think if we instill these healthy values where helping others is a good thing, like you get social brownie points for helping others instead of, teasing others. Yeah. That creates a different dynamic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more, my friend. So we had our mental health revisions. We've got kind of our critical thinking revisions. We've got our movement revisions. Nutrition, we haven't gone that deep into, but it's kind of the same principles of teach foundational, fundamental things at the grade school level and make our healthcare system foundationally based on those things. Yeah. So something I want to talk about with respect to healthcare and Halstead and being the coke addict and all that fun stuff. And so on that post, I have a friend who is a orthopedic surgeon. So she's a children's orthopedic surgeon. I ran track with her in college. She's one of the most brilliant people I've ever met in my life. And she commented on, she always kind of like razzes me on my posts, but when I say like, when your MD does this, find a different MD. And she's always, well, not every MD says this. So she's the person who kind of keeps me in line with that type of thing.
That's good. Those are important people.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that she mentioned when I made the comment on Halstead is, well, how the hell are you supposed to train a resident in only 5 years if we don't sleep deprive them? And my question is, why do we have to train them in 5 years? First off.
Yes.
Number two. So that's number one. So she's like, why don't well, if like we can't train them in 5 years, like, well, they should get paid for the 7 or 8 years that it would take. And I'm like, I agree. We should do that. Why don't we?
Yep.
So that's number one. But number two is an even more foundational question. It's kind of going back to the first principles thing is, why do we need 10 years to train someone to use a knife?
I agree.
So if we look at the orthopedic surgeon as the specialist they are, the highly trained specialist that should get paid a shit ton of money for what they do, okay? They should be paid a shit ton of money for what they do. They should need to be a great orthopedic surgeon. Mm-hmm. That great orthopedic surgeon doesn't need to be a great communicator. They don't need to do a round of basically urology. Like, they don't need to have a massive understanding of every single department of surgery.
I agree. There's a lot of fat.
Yeah, we can train, like, why do we have to train them in everything? Like,
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Yeah, I agree. It's like if you take the skill set that's required to be a competent surgeon,
Mm-hmm.
and if you look at the scope of their role, of what the modern day orthopedic surgeon is doing,
Mm-hmm.
then you're right. I think you look at the basket of everything they learn, and you look at the basket of everything they apply on a day-to-day basis and what they need to know to apply that effectively. There's probably way more shit in that basket than needs to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if we have an efficient divvying up of roles,
Yep.
so that there's less overlap, which
Yep.
is essentially a systemic inefficiency of time and energy spent learning something that's not being applied.
Yep.
Then you just have to think deeper, right? It's like, it's really easy to say, oh, just train in everything so that you can handle everything. But if that's not how the actual system is working as it's being implemented, well, then you're creating a lot of waste.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Those are great points, because I think answering a question with a question is a beautiful is an indicator that someone is, number one, listening, number two, thinking on a kind of a more of a macro level instead of just being in the specific, service level. Like, I think it's way better to ask deep questions than to give superficial answers. And I think that's a great deep question to ask, is like, well, once again, that was a permutation. She was reasoning by analogy, right? Mm-hmm. But when you break it down, when you blow the whole thing up and try and piece it back together with first principles,
mm-hmm.
you realize, like, wow, we got really far from what is actually optimal. Mm-hmm. And if you're only, I always use the analogy of the microscope lens, where you got that little turntable and you got like 10x, 100x, 1000x. Mm-hmm. If you're on 1000x, the solutions you come up with, however good they might be, will sometimes not be as good if you just twist that knob a couple times, go up to 10x and be like, oh, okay, I wasn't seeing all that stuff. But
yeah, I see more of the variables.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I agree. If we can increase that efficiency, and because I agree, the people who sacrifice a lot, and not sacrifice, but who devote a lot of energy, time, and a lot of their lives to learning a very complex skill that only a certain subset of the population is going to have the dedication to push towards, they should be compensated based on that effort level.
Absolutely.
But we need to rethink how those people are trained.
Yeah. And so what if it ends up being the system is rebuilt so that orthopedic surgeon is still making their $250,000 a year, but it's only from one surgery a day, because the system has been set up in such a way that monies are trickled into other parts of the system better, so that by the time it gets to that orthopedic surgeon, we know that we are using that person to the best of their expertise.
Yeah, and how about only one? Okay, so say you do 5 surgeries a day. Well, what if we rebuild a system where you don't need to see 5 people a day? There's actually only one person, it turns out, that needs to end up coming to you.
Yep.
So you just end up being really good at doing that one surgery, because the other 4 people, it was prevented. The requirement for surgery was prevented from the efficiencies of the pipeline before we got to that level.
Yep.
And it's almost like these effects that happen by just creating a good system instead of just patching up with a small permutation at the upper level.
Yes.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's a great point.
The only way this thing changes is at a global systematic level. So this idea of rebuilding education. So let's use me personally as an example. Okay. So educationally, I may have incidentally gotten some of the things that I needed to kind of build health into my life. But they could have systematically been there. All right. My current approach to my own personal health is I look at the lowest trained professional to deal with a certain issue.
Which makes sense.
So it will be like, I will deal with my nutrition, and I will deal, like, I've got foundational things that I know how. I'm not a nutritionist, but I have enough foundational nutrition things that I know how to eat healthy enough.
You understand food. You don't need to be a nutrition expert to understand what to put in your mouth. You just need to understand the heuristics of food.
Exactly. If I have different goals where I want to go a little bit deeper, I might talk to someone who has a little bit more expertise in nutrition, and I'll be like, hey, like, what do you think about XYZ? And they'll give me some feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't needed to go to a professional dietitian because I've been able to solve the problems at a more foundational level.
Right. And your access to information now, all of the smartest people who have dedicated literally their lives to understanding food, most of them have written books for the public, which simplify and distill the wisdom of 2 decades of research going into the weeds of food and giving people the 5% wisdom that is the most important shit for 95% of people to know and understand and have an extremely healthy relationship with food. That stuff's out there. And it's
like Matthew Walker's book with sleep. It's the same thing. Like, took 20 plus years of education and distilled it down to a 6-hour audiobook.
I know, it's so crazy. It's so crazy how much access we have to the smartest people who they themselves have written on the coattails of, thousands of years of education, which they've consumed and then basically vetted through their strong filter of science to give you the best shit. It's like, you don't have to be an expert. You can it's right there on a platter for you if you're willing to actually devote the energy to an audiobook, which is not that much energy.
Yeah, exactly. So as far as other health things, to make sure other things don't slip through the cracks, I have a nurse practitioner who kind of functions as my GP. So she has the ability to get routine blood work. And so I get my routine blood work done through her. I do it a little bit more often than the average person, and I get more stuff than the average person. And she will be like, everything looks good. This might be a little high. This might be a little low. You might want to consider maybe supplementing with this or maybe shifting this in your diet a little bit. Like, okay, great. Yeah. If there were any red flags that she saw, she would refer me to a formal GP.
Right.
And I would go that route. And if there were things that the GP found, then they would go to the next level and the next level and the next level.
Which is that is the hierarchy that makes sense.
Yeah. So far, it's been a couple of years since I've seen a GP because I've set a bunch of systems in place where that level of expertise hasn't been needed yet.
Yep.
And it's not to say it never will. So a different example was a few years ago. I was riding the bike trainer. I was riding the rollers, and I fell off, and I dislocated my shoulder. Straight to ER. Shoulder gets reset.
Right. Exactly.
Right? And so, like, I wasn't going to the personal trainer. I wasn't going to the physical therapist. Straight to the ER. Shoulder gets reset.
Right. Which is an effective use of that medical resource, because that is exactly what they're there for.
Yeah. So, yeah, there are other people out there like me. And what I think can happen is someone can design a health insurance system designed specifically for people like me and you.
Mm-hmm.
And then that health insurance system, we observe, gets you way higher quality care at a lower price.
Right. Because what you need is likely not the massive breadth of things, especially, I mean, if we layer that on top of this base foundational element of having come up in an educational system, which provides you a massive base understanding of being able to troubleshoot small issues, which right now are making up the bulk of the medical burden, then the overall efficiency of dollar for value is significantly higher, because you're not getting things you don't need, and you're getting the best things of the things that you might need.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now the question is, and I mean, we need to incentivize the system for efficiency. because right now a bloated system it seems like a bloated system is what's being financially incentivized, not for the individual, but for the people who are coordinating these systems.
Yep, for the policymakers, for the lobbyists, for just the momentum that's already been in play. So it may be, so if I'm looking kind of big picture, how does this rebuild happen? Maybe it ends up being someone like me or you runs for some type of civic position.
Yeah.
And
then creates a loud voice.
And that rebuild happens in a city.
Right.
And that city becomes an example for a region. And that region becomes an example for a province. And now that person becomes a minister at the state or provincial level. Or they become a minister at the federal level.
Yep.
So,
I agree. And if the public has an understanding of why those things are important and the potential benefit that come from those changes being implemented, then that they create the momentum that pushes this person along. And also too, it's like at that community level, right? If you start there, there's still going to be some, refining of that template that needs to happen as you start to come up to all these different roadblocks. You have to kind of just troubleshoot all the way through. So as it goes up in layers, that template gets more and more refined and more, I guess it develops its own immune system, basically, where all these uncertainties that it's been exposed to have made it more resilient and proven its effectiveness, despite what people will say, oh, well, what about this? It's like, well, we face that. This is the solution, and this is the outcome.
Yep.
And I think public education is always a great start, because those are the people who voice their opinions as to what they want, their leadership to value. But I agree. That's the only way change happens, is just starting. Because if you try and change the peak of the pyramid, your voice isn't even going to get heard. But if you start at the bottom at a very small level, and with technology and with the pace of change, I mean, that climbing of scale it can happen way quicker than it ever has been able to happen before.
Yep.
So, yeah,
I agree.
Shit.
So what do you think about my utopia?
Dude, that sounds like a glorious utopia. And I think the beautiful part is it's actually not like, this isn't so far-fetched that it stays in the category of utopia. This is like a solution, and actually a realistic solution because one of the objections people say, well, it's cost too much money. It's like,
no, this is a cheaper solution.
Yeah, this shit's all free. It's going to save you money. And it's just going to require people to understand how important it is. Like look at all the biggest things that are killing us and causing us to have a way shittier, not just lifespan, but health span. I think it's important to lower the burden of suffering. Don't you? And if someone says no, then maybe you're having the conversation with the wrong person.
Yeah, but I personally think there are enough, and I'll use my personal bias of functional range systems people, but I think there's enough people out there who have a fundamental understanding of movement who would gladly volunteer a day to talk to a local phys ed teacher and teach them the principles of closing angle joint pain in cars.
Well, so this is one, no, dude, I agree. And this is one thing that we're working on at TFC. And, all of our, I guess, strategies or products and services that we're trying to innovate are all based on a lot of these base premises, that it's really not that hard. It just requires effort by a group of people, because I think change happens collectively. And if we, one of our future projects that we want to do is align a group of health professionals who align on a set of values and beliefs that make sense for where the future of health needs to go in order to be sustainable, and essentially just build a bigger and bigger loudspeaker so that the voice of change can be disseminated further. And, with an app, here's the crazy thing. If you get a group of people from functional range conditioning to talk about movement, and you film it in really high quality in a way that has high production value and is very, even different levels where, okay, if you haven't heard of this stuff before, start here. Video 1, 10 minutes, brief intro. And you can put that on a platform that is free and has very low friction to be accessible by anyone. Like, we have teachers as part of the Footnerd program, which is kind of our attempt to start creating a better education offering to health pros in a variety of worlds or backgrounds. And you can give these high school teachers access to whatever the bleeding edge of health knowledge and health heuristics are, then they can disseminate it right from the source to their students, to their school, to their principal, to their school board. And I think with the power of digital technology combined with the power of community and a group of people that align on a bigger purpose than just what they're doing, but they want to achieve true change, and they have the awareness and even the resources to know what the path is, regardless of how hard the path might be to go down. That is the path. That is the solution. Yep. We've realized that building an app from scratch is probably, I think Elon Musk talks about starting companies like eating glass and staring into the abyss. Well, I think or starting an app is very, very well aligned with that, but it's also the most powerful tool we have today to be able to reach thousands of people.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, I think there's a huge community of people. And I think if we bring those individual nodes together in a way that benefits everyone and everyone is kind of aligned on what the purpose is and what the goals are, shit can change pretty quick, I think. So
yeah, definitely. It's again, just starts like there could be one principal at one school, or maybe a private school, because a Montessori school that can do their own thing, who sees this vision and is like, I'm all in.
Yep. Well,
Find
Bezos
me the
is
people who can
starting
make this
Maybe
happen.
maybe Bezos should just implement all this stuff. We got to get his ears on this podcast, because there are some wealthier people that are, I actually haven't fact checked that, but someone told me that Jeff Bezos was just like dissatisfied with the school system and just started his own school because he has a couple B's in the bank and he can, he can do that. And and if it starts with people like that, and you see these cohorts coming out of this school, this private school system that are just significantly more advanced in terms of their health awareness and their ability to think and be well prepared for a future, then that creates a really good template for like nationalized school boards to be like, oh, well, maybe we should learn from that, because that seems like a better way.
Yeah, for sure. Well, everything that you and I know about the impact of movement on brain function and sleep on brain function, if you built an education system that those two things were prioritized going into learning, like, even if you kept everything else the same, but you just had 10 jumping jacks right before each class, just to fire off a few more BDNF receptors so that they're now going to learn a little bit better. Like, by the end of 12 years of that, like, there would be some impact.
I agree. We got to build little care packages with Spark and Why We Sleep and just fire them out to every principal we know and just hope that one of them grabs onto it and is like, oh, okay, this shit makes sense. Let's do that, because it's worth it.
Yeah.
If it's all about the children, that seems to be a good play point to start with. So,
yep. Couldn't agree with you more, my friend.
Amazing. Well, dude, that was a powerful conversation. I think I'm going to listen to this probably a few times, and I think it's, we'll throw this in the Footner program curriculum, because we've already got a bunch of podcasts in there. We've just tried to curate all the best stuff that we've learned from to make it, to basically create clarity amidst the jungle of information available. That's really all. It's not new stuff. It's just
the thing is, like, I'm nothing special in these ideas. I have a certain skill in that I'm okay burning things to the ground and starting over. I've had to,
and I think that does make you. I think that makes you special, because there's not many people with the balls to have these conversations, or I shouldn't say balls, because that might not be correct, but to have the courage to have these conversations and know full well that they're probably going to piss off some people, but they're going to make way more people happy than they piss off. And they're speaking from a place of truth and to do good, right? Because your experience and the path that you've taken to get to where you are and how you go through your current experience makes you kind of a unicorn, right? You're not like, anyone can do that. Yeah. But not everyone.
And that's the point that I'm getting at, is that nothing that I've done has required a radical amount of resources and intelligence.
Right. I agree. It's just being resourceful and being a good thinker.
Yeah.
and also being
Which
just
we can train.
yeah, exactly. And just being an open-minded skeptic. Like I've always been a skeptic, but I think the open-minded part has been something I've been definitely understanding better these days, of being like, I will entertain every single perspective as valid until I do my own until I put it through my own filter of science. And which has made me realize that so many people are saying amazing things that I would have discounted, even 5 years ago. And, yeah, man, I appreciate the conversation deeply, and I look forward to the next one when we can pick another burn the house down topic and just riff on it, because
how about our respective professions?
Oh, dude. Okay, done. Let's do an episode on physio and an episode on chiro, or we can blend the two, because
we'll blend the two. I feel like that would be a really fun one.
And I don't think they're that different fundamentally when we get really deep into it. Like, yes, they're different, but the way that they've kind of veered off course is very similar. So
yes.
All right.
I feel like, and I guess this will be kind of a teaser for the next episode. I feel like a great chiropractor and a great physical therapist, on the surface, you should not be able to tell them apart.
I completely agree. And one of our foot nerds said exactly that. He's like, you know what I want? I want when someone comes to see me to not know what I am. I'm just the person that helps them. I was like, that is great. And I think that could be applied to so many different health professionals. And yeah, man, I look forward to that episode. So maybe we'll give this a month to simmer, and then I'll get back in touch. Love your content. And if people want to find you, where's the best? Because you're in Tampa, right?
Yes, I am in Tampa. The place where I put out the most of my content on my Instagram is just my name @MosesBernard. My website is the exact same thing, and so it's www.mosesbernard.com. I'm working on some online projects right now. So I've got an ultimate spine course that I just launched in March. The next round of signups for that is going to be in early July. In the educational thing we talked about, I want to find ways to distribute this knowledge to educational curriculums and educational systems. So what you talked about, kind of like a really high production value app type thing, I would like to have some really basic spine information that I can just filter out to grade school teachers, high school PE teachers, that just teaches them some foundational things that they can now apply to people. So cool. I'm learning from regular people to see how to best deliver that to the masses. So that's the project I'm working on right now. So that's where to find me.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time and for the great conversation. And I look forward to picking this up on our next conversation and seeing what kind of discussions this episode stimulates. And the hope is that people take some of this information that are in realms of what we covered that actually have the ability to make an on-the-ground impact, right? That high school teacher that hears this.
You're listening to this and you've got a few billions in the bank, let's have a conversation. You're a high school teacher, reach out to me, let's have a conversation. You're a policymaker, reach out to me, let's have a conversation.
Agreed. Yeah, Bezos, let's get on this. This is the way. So we want to help you. All right. Thanks, Moses. I appreciate it. And to everyone listening, I hope that benefited. I hope that gave you some value in terms of your own life, and we'll catch you next week.